Never eat street food after midnight in China, especially during the 7th lunar month. Because according to ancient Chinese belief, during this time, something terrifying happens. For one full month every year, the gates of the underworld are said to open. The barrier between the living and the dead dissolves, and the spirits of the forgotten begin to wander the earth. These are not the ghosts you see in movies. These are what Chinese folklore calls hungry ghosts. Spirits cursed with endless hunger, swollen stomachs, and throats so thin they can barely swallow. They roam the world looking for offerings: food, incense, paper money, and sometimes something far worse. So if you are walking alone late at night in China and suddenly smell the sharp scent of burning paper in the air, whatever you do not look behind you. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy true ghost stories and dark folklore from across Asia. We post new terrifying stories every week. And stay until the end of this video, because after the stories, I will explain the disturbing beliefs behind Hungry Ghost Month and why millions of people in Asia still fear it today. Now let's begin. Story 1. The Midnight Delivery. In a modern office building in Beijing, the air conditioning shut off automatically at midnight. It was a routine cost-saving rule set by the building's property management. For Wei, a 28-year-old software developer stuck working overtime, the rising heat was just another miserable layer added to an already exhausting week. It was mid-August, the peak of the suffocating Chinese summer. Humidity hung thick in the air outside the building, and inside the office, the air felt heavy and stagnant. Wei was the only employee left on the 14th floor. His company was pushing a massive software update that night, and he had drawn the short straw to stay behind and monitor the server migration. By 2 a.m, the sprawling open office was completely silent. The only sounds were the low hum of computer fans and the constant frantic clicking of Wei's mechanical keyboard. The glow from his monitors burned into his tired eyes. He rubbed his face and leaned back in his chair. Then his stomach growled loudly. Wei realized he had skipped dinner hours ago while finishing a difficult section of code. Now the hunger was becoming unbearable. He grabbed his phone and opened a food delivery app. At this hour, the options were terrible. Most of the well-known restaurants in the Haidian district were already closed. The only places still accepting orders were obscure late-night barbecue stalls and unfamiliar noodle shops. Wei scrolled through the listings. One option caught his attention: a place called Midnight Cravings. The listings simply read, traditional pork and rice. No pictures, no reviews. But the delivery time was only 15 minutes. Too hungry to care, Wei placed the order. As he waited, something about the atmosphere in the office began to change. At first it was subtle. The thick air carried a strange smell, metallic, like copper, mixed with something else, burnt paper. Wei assumed it was smog drifting through the ventilation system. He stood up to stretch and walked over to the massive windows overlooking the sleeping city. The streets far below were completely empty. Then he remembered something. The date. It was the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, the peak of the Hungry Ghost Festival. Wei wasn't a superstitious person, but his grandmother back in Sichuan had always warned him about this time of year. Never stay out late during Hungry Ghost Month, and never eat food from unknown places after midnight. Wei shook his head and laughed quietly. He was a modern man living in a modern city. Ghost stories belonged in the past. Then his phone buzzed. A message from the delivery driver appeared. left at the front desk. Wei frowned. After midnight, the elevators required a security keycard. How had the driver gotten up to the 14th floor? He stepped out of the glass doors of his department and walked down the long, dim corridor toward reception. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Shadows stretched along the frosted glass walls of the conference rooms. When Wei reached the reception desk, he saw the plastic bag sitting neatly on the polished marble counter. There was no receipt attached, and the bag itself was a strange, dull gray color. Wei touched the container inside. It was ice cold, which made no sense in the summer heat. Still hungry, Wei carried the bag back to his desk. He opened the styrofoam container. The smell hit him instantly. It was not the smell of pork. It smelled like burnt wood, old incense, and meat that had been left to rot in the sun. The rice inside was gray and clumped together. The chunks of meat were unnaturally dark, almost black. Wei stared at it in disgust. But suddenly a strange hunger surged through his body. It didn't feel like normal hunger. It felt desperate, ravenous, like something inside him was starving. Before he could stop himself, Wei picked up his chopsticks and shoved a large bite into his mouth. The rice turned into dry powder on his tongue. It tasted exactly like ash from burnt joss paper. The meat was tough and flavorless, but he kept eating, bite after bite, faster and faster. Tears streamed down his face as the rotten taste filled his mouth. Finally, the container was empty. Wei collapsed back in his chair. His stomach felt painfully swollen, yet the hunger inside him had not disappeared. It had grown stronger. His throat began tightening. He grabbed his water bottle and tried to drink, but the water wouldn't go down. Panicking, Wei opened the building's security camera system. He rewound the footage from the reception desk. At 2:14 a.m., the elevator doors opened, but no one stepped out. Instead, something floated out. A thin skeletal figure hovered above the floor. Its limbs looked like dry twigs wrapped in pale skin. Its stomach was grotesquely swollen, but its neck was impossibly thin. The creature carried the plastic bag. It placed the bag on the counter, then leaned over it. A stream of black vapor flowed from the container into the creature's mouth. It was consuming the essence of the food, leaving nothing behind but ash. Then the entity turned its head and looked directly into the security camera. Slowly, it raised a long finger and pointed directly toward Wei's office. Wei's blood ran cold. From the dark hallway outside, he heard a sound. Wet footsteps, bare feet slapping slowly against the floor, moving closer, closer. Wei tried to scream, but his throat had shrunk so tightly, only a faint rasp escaped. The footsteps stopped outside his glass door. Wei was never seen again. The only thing investigators found was an empty food container, filled with wet, gray ashes. Story 2: The Offering. The southern city of Guangzhou is famous for its vibrant nightlife. Towering modern apartment buildings sit beside ancient neighborhoods connected by narrow alleyways and crowded night markets. Lin had lived in the Yeshou district for 3 years. She was a practical, level-headed nurse who worked long overnight shifts at the provincial hospital. Walking home at 3 in the morning was a routine she had grown completely used to. She knew which alleyways were safe, which streetlights worked, and which stray dogs to avoid. But during the 7th lunar month, the city felt different. The streets of Guangzhou slowly transformed. At dusk, families came outside carrying bundles of incense and stacks of folded joss paper. They burned offerings on sidewalks and street corners for their ancestors and wandering spirits. Small fires flickered along the streets. Paper money turned to ash, and plates of food were left at intersections. Fruit, rice, roasted meats, cups of rice wine. By the early morning hours, the fires had died down, leaving behind piles of gray ash and scattered offerings. Lin knew about these traditions. Every child in China grows up hearing the same warning. Never disturb an offering left for the spirits, because taking food meant for the dead is said to invite their anger. That night, Lin had just finished a 14-hour shift. Her body ached with exhaustion. Her white nursing shoes felt heavy as she walked home through the humid summer air. She turned into her usual shortcut, a narrow alleyway between two old residential buildings. Several streetlights were broken. Large sections of the alley were swallowed by darkness. The air smelled strongly of burnt paper and sandalwood incense. Lin walked quickly, her mind drifting toward the comfort of her bed waiting at home. She wasn't watching where she stepped. Then suddenly, crunch. Her foot landed on something soft. A ceramic plate shattered beneath her shoe. Lin froze. She slowly looked down. Her heel had crushed an offering plate. A bruised orange was smashed beneath her shoe. White rice and gray ash were smeared across the pavement. Her stomach dropped. Even though Lin didn't consider herself very religious, she had grown up hearing the same warning. Never step on offerings left for spirits, because doing so is like stealing food from the starving dead. Lin quickly lifted her foot. "I'm sorry," she whispered nervously into the empty alley. She wiped her shoe against the curb, but the rice and ash smeared into a dark, sticky stain. Suddenly she felt uneasy. A creeping paranoia crawled up her spine. Lin began walking faster. The alley suddenly felt longer than usual. The shadows along the brick walls seemed distorted and stretched. Then she heard it. Behind her. Footsteps. But they didn't sound like normal footsteps. They were dragging. Slow. Uneven. Scuff. Drag. Scuff. Drag. Lin's heart began to pound. She walked faster. The footsteps behind her matched her speed. She tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just an old neighbor walking home, or a stray dog following her. Then another sound echoed through the alley. A sharp metallic clink, like a coin dropping onto concrete. Then another. Clink, clink, clink. The sound made her blood run cold. They sounded exactly like ancient copper burial coins. Lin refused to turn around. Her grandmother had always told her something terrifying. Every person carries 3 invisible flames of life, 1 on each shoulder, and 1 on the top of the head. If you turn your head when a spirit calls you, you blow out one of those flames. And once the flames are gone, spirits can possess you. Lin stared straight ahead. Her apartment building entrance was just visible at the end of the alley. She began running. The dragging footsteps behind her grew louder, closer. Almost right behind her. Lin sprinted the final stretch and slammed her hand against the keypad of her building entrance. Her code flashed green. She threw the heavy iron door open and stumbled inside. The door slammed shut behind her. Lin leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. The lobby was brightly lit, quiet, safe. She listened carefully. There were no footsteps outside, no dragging, no coins. Slowly, she calmed down. She took the elevator up to the 8th floor where her apartment was located. When the doors opened, Lin stepped into the hallway. The motion sensor lights flickered on. Something immediately felt wrong. The hallway was freezing cold, far colder than the humid night outside, and the air smelled like rot. Lin slowly walked toward her apartment. Then she saw them. Footprints. Dark, greasy footprints on the tiled floor. They were small, almost like a child's feet, but the toes were long and claw-like. The footprints began at the elevator and ended directly in front of her apartment door. Lin's hands shook as she pulled out her keys. Before she could unlock the door, she heard a sound from inside. Wet chewing. Greedy, ravenous chewing. Lin froze. She lived alone. Slowly she leaned toward the door and looked through the peephole. Inside the apartment, the lights were off. Moonlight from the window faintly illuminated the room. A figure knelt on the living room floor, its back facing the door. Its thin spine pressed sharply through pale gray skin. It was stuffing something into its mouth with both hands, eating desperately. Then suddenly, the chewing stopped. The creature's head twisted around at an unnatural angle. Its eyes were black, empty pits. Its mouth stretched open, smeared with ash and dirt. And it was staring directly at Lin through the peephole. Then the creature lunged at the door. Lin screamed and fell backward. A thunderous crash shook the hallway as something slammed violently against the door from inside. Again and again. The steel door began bending outward. Lin ran. She spent the rest of the night inside a brightly lit convenience store. When the sun rose, she returned with police officers. But when they opened the apartment, everything inside was untouched. Nothing stolen. No signs of entry. Except one thing. In the center of the living room floor sat a crushed orange, a pile of rice, and gray ash, exactly where Lin had stepped in the alley. Lin moved away from that apartment. But sometimes in the middle of the night, she still hears dragging footsteps outside her door, followed by the faint sound of coins hitting the floor. Story 3. The Ghost Opera. Deep in the mountains of Sichuan province, traditions still hold immense power. The villages there are isolated, hidden among thick bamboo forests and wrapped in constant fog. During Hungry Ghost Month, one of the most important traditions takes place. It is called the Ghost Opera. Temporary stages are built in village squares. Performers dressed in elaborate masks sing traditional operas under bright lantern light. But the performance is not meant for the villagers. It is meant for the spirits. There is one rule that must never be broken. The entire first row of seats must remain empty. Those seats belong to the ghosts. Chen was a filmmaker from Shanghai. He had traveled to the village to film a documentary about rural Chinese traditions. Chen didn't believe in superstitions. He thought the villagers' beliefs were primitive folklore. Excellent material for his film. When he saw the empty red chairs in the front row, he laughed. Ignoring the terrified whispers of the villagers, Chen walked forward. An elderly man grabbed his arm and begged him not to sit there. Chen shoved him aside and sat down in the center seat. He raised his camera. The view was perfect, but something on stage immediately changed. The performers froze, their eyes filled with terror. The music became uneven and chaotic. Chen kept filming. Then suddenly the air around him became freezing cold. His breath appeared in the air, and he felt pressure on both sides of his body, like people sitting beside him. But when he looked, the chairs were empty. Then his camera screen glitched. Static flickered across the image. Through the lens, Chen saw something horrifying. The empty chairs were not empty. They were filled with figures wearing ancient burial robes. Their skin was swollen and gray, their throats thin like needles, and every single one of them was staring directly at him. Chen dropped the camera and ran. That night in his guest house, he tried to convince himself it had all been a hallucination. But around 3 a.m, he woke up. The room was freezing, and the sound of opera music echoed softly in the darkness. Something heavy sat down on the edge of his bed. A voice whispered beside his ear, "You took our seat. Now we take your breath." The next morning, Chen was found dead in his room. His eyes were frozen wide with terror. His stomach was swollen, and his throat was packed with wet joss paper and gray ash. Hungry ghosts are believed to be spirits cursed with endless hunger. Their stomachs are enormous, but their throats are so thin they can barely swallow. That is why people burn offerings, to calm them, to feed them. But what if the stories are true? What if for 1 month every year, the gates of the underworld really do open, and the starving dead walk among us? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And subscribe for more true ghost stories from across Asia.